Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today we're going to talk about cybermetrics and what boards should know. And joining me to talk about this is Don Keller, who's a partner with PwC's Center for Board Governance. Don, welcome to the show.
Thank you, TK. Pleasure to be here.
So I know you guys have done extensive publications and have researched this topic pretty well, but let's start. How about if you provide our audience with sort of an update on the concern of in the boardroom of cybersecurity and cyber risks? That's probably a good place for us to start.
I think so, and we can start narrow, TK. With cybersecurity specifically, the noise level obviously is not going away. There is tremendous concern on the part of directors today relative to cybersecurity issues, almost to the point where you feel like there's cybersecurity fatigue out there every conference you go to, every session you attend. I think to some extent directors and boards have gotten more comfortable with the notion of cybersecurity, but that doesn't mean that the noise level is subsiding when every day you pick up the newspaper and you hear about another breach. There's a lot of factors to consider. Certainly that there are a number of third parties that are integrated with the company's systems, digital systems today on the supply side, on the distribution side, compounding risks. Whether or not to have a CISO, I think, is a discussion of a lot of boards. About 2/3 of the boards in North America currently have a chief information security officer, having a lot of dialogue with boards around, gee, should you name one? Our thinking is that even if you don't have a CISO per se, that you at least should have documented in someone's job description that someone is in charge of security, and the board should know who that is.
So I understand that your comment that boards are feeling more comfortable, yet because this is a relatively new threat, okay, in the world of threats, people that were former CEOs didn't have to go through this, and former accountants didn't have to really go through it. So we're starting to see, we still see this confidence gap, okay, between them understanding cyber risk and what's happening today. So how do we sort of bridge that gap? How do we get the directors knowing what to do and maybe even more important, making sure that they have a plan for when they do get breached?
Well, I think it's a real challenge, TK, because average age of a director today, 63 years old. We grew up in a pre-digital era. The first social media system we knew was the telephone system. We were familiar with card readers, COBOL, Fortran, those types of sophisticated digital technology, and the world has changed so much. Couple that with the fact that only 1% or so of existing Fortune 500 directors have been a CIO or have that in their background. The jargon can be very technical and difficult for directors to follow. So this confidence gap is inherent, frankly, in all of America's boardrooms relative to their ability to understand. I think what's critical is taking this conversation a little broader, that there is an approach, a methodology, if you will, that directors can follow that will allow them to have a pattern, a schematic of how they want to approach broader oversight of IT within their companies, not necessarily focused just on the head of the pin of cybersecurity, but even in a broader context where they're looking at other peripheral factors, considering that IT is integrated with risk, with strategy, with initiatives, with a whole lot of other activities that go beyond perhaps what many would define as being traditional cybersecurity per se. Big data, cloud computing, mobile computing, et cetera. So I think at the board level, it's critical that they decide who in fact is going to oversee IT, and leads to the notion of, well, am I better off having one set of data covering cybersecurity per se, feeding to the board in the form of metrics and analysis, or should I have the same people also overseeing the strategic side of IT, including our initiatives, our spend, et cetera, and have a designated group that's responsible for sort of all aspects of IT oversight?
Knowing all this, are you in favor on the board of bringing on, as a board member, sort of a single skilled individual that understands cyber risk with all that you said, or do you believe that that's something that can be inherently taught to existing directors? Where do you come out when you on that debate, which is a pretty good debate these days?
Yes, it is. I condone an approach whereby you decide what horsepower you have on the board to oversee IT, and then decide who is going to in fact oversee that process. It's going to be the audit committee, and the majority of time it is the audit committee. About a quarter of the time it's a full board, still very few risk committees or IT committees at the board level overseeing IT. If you feel the need to bring someone on, certainly that is an approach, but where I see the principal demand for board members from an IT perspective is more on the strategy side. For an executive that's run a business unit at an Amazon, a Google, et cetera, and not necessarily the CIO per se, which some perceive to be 6 inches wide and a mile deep with that level of specialization. So I think a lot of boards are looking at the broader concept of IT oversight, the strategy side, understanding social media, et cetera, and that there is demand there. I will say, though, that there is a tremendous increase in the number of consultants that boards are hiring to help them with IT issues. Now, almost 40% of boards, based on our data, are in fact using an outside IT consultant.
Yeah, and unfortunately, whenever you have this, that something gets popular, a lot of people start to hang shields out. So you really need to be careful to do your due diligence on who you're using as that third-party expert. That sort of, that's where I get back to saying, the proven providers or resources really should be your go-to versus somebody that just hung a shield out that happened to work for, let's say, the FBI or the CIA, that all of a sudden feels that they're an expert. So,
well, I think that's right, and I think that what we're seeing is about 90% of those board-level consultants are tailored to a specific project. They're not an ongoing relationship throughout the year in terms of advising the board, but they're brought in to look at a system implementation, a cybersecurity issue, investigate a breach, et cetera. So they're targeted and narrow enough to a specific project.
Yeah. So let's talk about the publication, your Cybermetrics. The center does a very good job on creating publications that are manageable. And by manageable, we as directors don't have a whole lot of time to absorb something. And I tip my hat because the publications are very succinct. Here's what you got to know in steps. And I find refreshing versus these manuscripts that somehow people believe that a director's going to get through. So summarize those important steps that you guys have identified in your Cybermetrics publication for our audience, and then I'll tell them how to get a copy of that.
Well, thank you for the compliments, TK. We try and keep it manageable for directors in the form of an easy read. I will mention there is also this methodology that we have for IT oversight called a user-friendly guide to IT oversight for directors that is also an excellent resource. But on to Cybermetrics, which we've defined as those metrics related to digital assets that directors should be receiving on an ongoing basis to monitor in the boardroom and written a paper specifically for that aspect of our overall IT oversight framework. I think that there are a number of things that all boards should know. Baseline information, call it what you will. But that baseline information should include the status of the company's IT infrastructure, whether or not there has been deferred maintenance where budget constraints have precluded a company from actually implementing the latest updates, upgrades, and enhancements to their software. The level of cybersecurity spend relative to year over year and relative to others in the industry. There also is information they should be obtaining about the company's approach to cyber insurance. Do we have it? Do we not have it? What does it cover? What doesn't it cover? And the rationale, not to condone cyber insurance per se, but suggesting that the board at least should be inquiring about that aspect. There is shadow IT, which is spend outside of the IT department. How much shadow IT is going on within the company? So there's some baseline information that every director should get relative to the company's IT systems. Now, beyond that, there are specific metrics that need to be prioritized and condoned. We provide a menu, if you will, of possible metrics for those peripheral areas that I've talked about: big data, cloud, social media, mobile computing, traveling with your PC, and then the board can adopt specific metrics relative to those issues that will be useful in overseeing sort of the broader aspects of IT beyond fundamental cybersecurity. And if you think about the notion of, gee, should I have one group of the board, one set of directors, be it the audit committee or otherwise, to oversee cybersecurity, should they not also be overseeing other aspects of IT in a holistic manner so that there is one data feed to the directors to allow them to carry out this very important responsibility that encompasses, again, not just cyber security issues, but also the company's development strategy, et cetera, with leveraging IT for future benefits, so at some point down the road they don't get Amazoned and end up in a scenario where they've been outperformed by their competitors who better utilize the leverage of information technology.
Well, lot to absorb, but again, this publication does a good job of sort of summarizing that. I'm assuming that people can go to your website to get a copy of this, and it's downloadable if I remember correctly, so we'll put that on our screen so that our viewers can see that. And Don, I want to thank you for taking the time to come in and talk about Cybermetrics with us, and we look forward to having you back later on another topic out of the center, so thanks for joining us.
Thank you, TK. Pleasure to be here.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We'll be back again next week with another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.